talk about full stack XP. XP, extreme programming in all parts of our product. There's a lot of XP practices. And most of them are pretty easy to apply to any part of the organization for software development. But a lot of people, when they start talking about trying to do some of the technical practices, maybe say in the database, or maybe say in the using JavaScript in the web tier, in the browser tier, they don't do any of those practices. They may not do, for example, test-driven development. Maybe they don't pair program and those other things. But a lot of what we're going to talk about today is around unit testing and test-driven development, because that's where a lot of the questions come up. That's me. I've been doing XP for a long time, and frequently I do XP as well with Scrum together. I really enjoy test-driven development. It's really changed how I deliver product. And then there's some contact points. If you are interested in further information about unit testing, test automation, or Agile, I frequently chat about those things on Twitter. So even after this conference, we can maintain contact with each other. All right? Ideally, to win this game, is you want to have a cross-functional team. Somebody knows something about JavaScript, somebody knows something about the middle tier, Java, C#, whatever that is, or C++, and then somebody on the database. It's okay if you're not prepared. We'll still have fun anyhow. So I have even a practice question, because I got to warm you guys up to get used to answering these things. And because see, I've tricked you. You don't know this, but usually you have a big lecture and you have Q&A at the end. Well, today we're going to have a lot of Q&A, except I'm going to be asking the questions. We'll move on to the real deal. We're getting started. You ready? We've had fireworks. We have some celebrities. They're coming to the show as well. All right, so let's see what a full stack kind of looks like. We have client-side code, browser-side code, server-side code. You know, the whole works there. I don't think. Are we missing anything? Are we missing anything? Looks like everything's there. Yeah. And we have all these things to do with XP, right? And a lot of people struggle with trying to do test-driven development, maybe emergent design as well on some of those tiers. Those seem to be the biggest problems. So here's our first question. All right. What's the easiest tier in which to do TDD? Or I'm sorry, to do XP? And we have our tiers there. He's the first one over here. So what's your answer, sir? Honestly, this is a trick question. Today, most people will tell you it's the middle, right? I can do test-driven development quite easily. But all of them aren't any harder than the other. It's more about the knowledge to do it. Meaning, if you don't know if you only knew how to do, say, JUnit, and your team is creating stored procedures, they would say, oh, JUnit's quite simple, but the database, we won't do testing in that. So, but on the other hand, if you had the knowledge to do the database, you would think the other tier is hard. So honestly, they're all easier. It's a trick question, but you get a prize anyhow, sir. So tough crowd. Also, most people would say is the middle tier. And the reason why they're booing is, come on, you know, all tiers are really easy if you know how. But the middle tier is frequently what people start with, because that's where JUnit first came out, and that was the earliest the tool where large numbers of people started doing unit testing. Okay? So the middle tier, we have things like business services, we have some system-level services, we have Java running in an app server, or C# running in .NET. And we have, oftentimes, we have some services. So in this case, you know, think of an app server with a virtual machine And we're talking about service-oriented architecture or service-oriented applications. We're getting ready for true or false. So take a look at this code. This code over here on the right. Okay? Can test first be used to test drive this code? False. Tell me more, sir. Tell me why. Have to load the object exactly what you want to test. Can you be specific about this code? You see you have some annotations. Looks like we're doing some kind of REST API. So,
sorry, I did not understand the code, but I see that there are mixture of things there. So you can't do the test of the approach if you have a lot of things.
Okay. That's actually mostly true. What he said is correct. It's hard. You can't quite do test first on all of this code. So there'll be some of this code that's very difficult or impossible to do in a unit test first. Okay? So he has a point. We'll have to remember that. We'll come back to you by the end of the slide. Somebody else could get more points here before the end of the slide. So what line of code? So let me be specific here. We have a public class, right? And we can do some unit testing. We could do test-driven development on much of what's in here. So we're going to create an object. It's going to return an object. It's going to do some activities. It's got a catch, and it's going to return some output. Okay? Park.getSquirrel. Tell me more. Okay. Very nice. So he says, hey, we have to do unit testing in memory. And so that line of code must be system tested rather than unit tested or mocked. Okay? So the interesting thing here is if you mock it, anytime you mock something, you're not actually testing it. You're testing the things around it. So actually test that line of code can can talk to the database and retrieve that squirrel with that ID. You actually have to system test that one piece. But the code around it can be unit tested using test first. So he's right on the money. So he has a point as well. And by the end of the slide, we'll see who has the most points. We may end up in a tie here. What else?
We can't really do a unit testing because we are assuming things that once this method is returning something, so the return object is a squirrel object. We unit test it. But the things above that, this would be in a runtime environment.
So you're talking about some of these things, I would think? Yeah. Right. So that line of code, and we already said this line of code, are our problems for doing unit testing at this point, right? And he had a solution. He said you can mock that part. That's absolutely right. And then you're saying, well, we know we can't unit test that part because we can call that line directly in unit tests. And that would be my recommendation to you. Do test-driven development, develop that getter, and then at the end, when you're happy with your unit tests and you've mocked that piece, you have to ask yourself, wow, I still have more code to add. I have these annotations I need, because it won't actually be a service yet. Okay, so now you have to think about building a system test. Spring MVC, monolithic control. So you're saying that the area that I've circled with the path and the
Yeah, that can be.
using unit test or using network as well? can you connect to, are you going to use a network socket to talk to that service? Right, and now you're no longer unit testing. You're now into the area of system testing. So there'll probably be some disagreements here. The main thing is there's some things you should do in a unit test, and there's some things you should never do in a unit test. Your unit test should never make network connections. Your unit test should not talk to databases. Your unit test should not talk to file systems. So you can write that system test. You've described to me what would be a system test. It's going to use a network connection, and that's fine. The difficulty is we can't write lots of system tests because they will have a very slow test suite. So tactically, we want to write a lot of unit tests, as many as possible for this code. And anything we can't unit test, we need to be able to identify and recognize, and then those become part of our system test suite. All right? So let's talk about unit test only for a moment. How many unit tests do you think you need to write to cover this code? So if somebody did test-driven development on this code, and I mean unit testing, how many unit tests do you expect to see at the end of that as a result? 3? I don't know who spoke first, so you guys have to, who was first over here, roughly? 3? Okay, let's go. So we need a test for the positive test case, which means we get a squirrel out. Okay, and we need a test for the exception. Okay, and the other one is on the this one here, the if. Yeah, very good. Yep. So you need at least 3, and I think that's a good number, right? You may be able to prove I missed something here, but generally that looks right to me. That's how many I was guessing as well. All right? So does that make sense? To do TDD, we have to pass in, we're going to call this API directly. We're going to pass in a squirrel ID. And we want to write a failing test case that says, hey, when I ask the database for a squirrel, does it give me back a squirrel? That would be your positive test case you described. Okay? And that test will fail. Of course, you'll have to, when you implement this, you have to use a mock object. So when that test fails, you then go into the code and you drop in a mock object. And your mock object's programmed to say, yeah, I got the squirrel. Okay? And then that test, you run that code, the test passes, you're happy. And then you think, wow, I have this other situation where if there's no squirrel, I need to pass in a different ID. And I'm going to set up my mock object to respond with null. And I should get back that exception. And then, of course, this one, which is very hard to system test. Very hard to system test this kind of code right here. Most people can't cover it. But with a unit test, you can. Your mock object just throws some kind of service-oriented error that you're concerned about. And then you can easily handle that. OK? Does that sound fair? Can we give him that point? OK, cool. So we have a three-way tie, I believe. 1, 1, and who was the other first person who answered the question? 1 back here. So we have a three-way tie. All right? So my proposal is let's use the next test. Let's use the next question as a tiebreaker, all right, between you 3. Ooh, it's getting competitive now. And so when I throw up the next question, which is about the deadly unit test sins, which we've talked a little bit about right now, we're going to use the next question as a tiebreaker. So whoever answers the next question first will have a chance to break the tie if they get it right. Okay? So which of the following is allowed in a unit test? Number 1, network access. So it's about which one is allowed. So whoever can tell me out of the next one, file access, hardware clock, database access. The third one? Sorry, so I got to focus on my three-way tie here. So which one's allowed? Hardware clock? Which one's allowed? Which one's allowed? Which one's allowed? None of them are allowed. Okay, I've tricked you, I'm sorry. So think about this. The hardware clock was the favorite answer. Let's talk about that for a moment. One of my favorite trainings when I train people on doing test-driven development is to build hello world using TDD. Okay? Hello world using TDD seems quite simple. You need, it's a getter that returns a string, right? Probably only need one unit test for that. There's no input. That's why it's only one. Okay? Now that's fine. And when a person can demonstrate they know TDD well enough to do that, and by the way, I use this as an interview question because it's a simple thing that can be done over email or over the phone. If you can show me you can write a unit test, and you can show me you can even do hello world, that tells me that you have an idea. Because some people have no idea, right? They get confused. They don't know what TDD is. Now, the next question is where we get into the business. What if I say it returns hello world and the current time? All right? So the current time comes from the hardware clock. How do you write a unit test that runs all the time if you're using the hardware clock? So if it returns the time now and you write your unit test really fast, you hit run, and maybe by chance you get it right, you hit it on the second, it passes. But like within 60 seconds, you run it again, it'll fail, right? So a unit test, actually, you have to mock the hardware clock as well. So we still have a three-way tie. It's quite exciting here. Okay, here's our three-way tiebreaker. How about this? He was first. My apologies. We were slow. So he says yes. Sorry? Ah. Ah. Cool. So he said, I'll repeat it for the audience here because they may not have heard you. He says we use an in-memory database, and you can correct me if I got something wrong here, and they got 100% unit test coverage by communicating with the in-memory database rather than the external database. Did I miss anything? You said some other things.
Yeah, for the data access layer.
For the data access layer. Okay. Honestly, this is a hard question. I have trouble with this. I usually say yes, but. Yes, it's a unit test, only if it's fast. That's my but, right? Because this is sort of a new thing. It's a little ambiguous now. We're actually talking to an in-memory database, but it's in memory. And if your in-memory database performs appropriately, meaning most unit tests take 1 millisecond to execute. And if your in-memory database takes within that range, say 1 to 10 milliseconds, that's probably a good strategy. The things that are bad strategies is when you talk to a real database, and it takes generally at least a second. And quite frankly, sometimes your database isn't working, and so the unit test fails, and that's not good. So if your in-memory database runs so fast that you actually don't notice it, then that's perfect. Okay, so he wins the tiebreaker. Did you already get a T-shirt? Whoa, okay, we have to watch out for this guy. We don't want him to sweep all the questions here. Let's go with the comic. There we are. Just hand him one of these. Yeah, congratulations. Let me check the time. I want to cover the full stack before we finish today. All right. Anybody here use Spring? I bet more of you use Spring. Spring's very popular. Unless I got. By the way, let me ask you a different question. Who uses .NET? Okay. Oh, he uses Spring and .NET. Okay. And all right, cool. Yeah. So Spring is who's using Spring with .NET? Is that really? No. Okay. I was just checking. I'm not familiar with anybody doing that as well, but he raised his hand, and you did too. Okay. Cool. I'm trying to be a little bit technology agnostic, though you'll hear me and see a lot of my code snippets will be in some code base. I had to pick. But anyways, Spring. Unit testing in Spring is kind of interesting. Who can answer this? All right. Get this man a T-shirt. All right. So app config files needed, all right? And for writing system tests, is it an acceptable strategy to require this file? Yes or no? Okay, I need somebody needs to admit to being the first one so I could give you a point. Otherwise, I don't know. Who said yes first? Do you know? Can you guys decide? Okay. Maybe this fellow, okay? All right, he's got it. So yes, it is. It's a file, right? Didn't break those deadly sins we talked about earlier. For writing unit tests, is it acceptable to use this file as well? Oh, he said no again. Good. I bet, how many people are doing unit tests, but they're using the file in their unit tests? All right? All right, cool. So I discourage that because my performance metrics I've taken on it, if you use, remember, unit tests take about a millisecond to execute normally. If you use Spring and you use its configuration file to set up your unit test, there's two aspects that I personally don't like too much. Number one, you have a file that might be used by many unit tests. And so now that file is now like a global namespace. And if you mess up something in that file, a whole bunch of tests will be impacted. So your test isolation is broken down. But maybe we could live with that. You know, I don't do everything perfect. It takes me a while to learn how to solve these problems. But maybe we could live with that. But then the next problem comes up. A test that uses the Spring configuration file to do the injection will take about 100 orders of magnitude longer. So you're now in the hundreds of milliseconds to even 1,000 milliseconds, so full, close to a full second for one unit test. That depends on your hardware. If you have an SSD drive, et cetera. On this system, SSD drive, it probably takes anywhere from 300 to 400 or 500 milliseconds. But that's 300 or 400 milliseconds instead of one. Now you could say, I can live with that, Lance. But now you have like two kind of concerns. And if you use this strategy frequently, you're really going to slow down your unit tests as a whole. All right? So he has a point. Sorry, my outstanding points is this man and who was the first person who got a point? I'm trying to remember. I already awarded him, though. I jumped the gun. I should have waited until I was done with the whole slide deck. Somebody else. Somebody else I said earlier. Who got the writing system tests is an acceptable strategy to require this file? Somebody else said it. Did you say both of these then? Oh, he's really, okay. He's sitting pretty good. Last one. What's an acceptable alternative for unit testing with, that uses Spring that doesn't require that file? If you're using files, you probably didn't know about the alternative strategy, but go ahead. A Java-based configuration, right? That's one alternative. And by the way, there's more than one, so that's good. That's a good answer. He's ahead by 2, though, so you can't win on this slide. Okay. Another one. What's that? What do you say?
Java factories.
Java factories. Is that what you said?
Yep.
Okay. So you're using Java factories for?
Pojo factories, yeah.
Pojo factories. So are you still using Spring, or are you doing something different to inject?
Yep. So during test, Pojo factory is doing the injection, IOC. Yeah.
So you're doing your own injection with the factories, or?
Yep.
Oh, okay. Cool. Yeah. That's one I haven't personally used. Sounds good. A third one is there's this API to inject it. Okay. And all it does is use reflection underneath and handle that matter. And that one runs pretty fast. In fact, I can't tell the difference between doing direct injection by hand or using that. Okay? So don't fear, there'll be a link at the end that has a blog article about doing unit testing in Spring, and it covers all these details. Okay? So, but this man, he won a prize, so could you hand him a T-shirt? Make sure you get the right size, by the way. We have 3 sizes, so if that isn't the right size, we can swap it. So this fellow back here, he won this deck. Congratulations. Yes? Excuse me? Oh, that's a good idea. That's our fashion consultant, Babu Srinivas. Notice he's wearing his suit with the lapels today. Very nice. All right. The other part of the tier. All right. Who works in back end? Wow, quite a few. All right, cool. People are always shocked when they hear the booze, like, what? Who said that? So this is the develop docs before the code tier. Now, you could say, why am I saying that? Well, I don't say that. That's pretty much how people, most people, maybe not the people at an XP conference, but most people out in the outside world, they want their upfront design when they go into the back end. All right? That may not be you, or it may be. I don't know. You don't have to admit to this. All right, which of the following describes emergent design? Defining a schema a year in advance, or defining a schema a month in advance, or defining a schema a sprint in advance, or defining a schema during the sprint. Do you want to commit to that answer? You think that's it? Okay, he's committing. And what do you? So he's first on that one. Sorry, go ahead. Three. We have some threes over here, but he's on four. So he was the first to respond. Hang on a second. We got one more. One more. All of the above. Does anyone want to pick that one? No. So 3 and 4. Okay. I think I'm going to have to award it to this fellow. He was the first one to say something here. Let's talk about this. Why do we have to do it a sprint in advance?
Because when we are getting started with the sprint, it's better to have an idea of what we want to achieve by the end of it. So if we have a schema, it gives the engineering team a better direction to work towards. It can obviously change at some point of time later, but that can also be addressed in the next sprint.
Okay, I think you handled that pretty well. You're saying, well, we're going to need to have some kind of idea, but it could also change. That's the key word. In the back, sir.
Yeah, so if the story is really well split, probably guides a little clear, and you also have some work to be done. So the schema is like, if I'm in the sprint, then the other guys are going to be building this, I'm doing nothing. So might as well, do it in a sprint advance so that everybody knows what needs to be done.
Sprint advance, all right, all right. Well, go ahead.
If I one sprint ahead, at least I can know what is needed for me for the execution of the sprint. Or I can identify blockers if any before taking up the use.
Okay, okay. Wow, go ahead. Go ahead, please.
So it is really tight because we need all of them to see the pattern emerging.
Maybe. I mean, I kind of, number one is like too far in the future for me. It's like, that's like to me an epic story, and I'm not too interested in thinking about schemas at that point.
One is probably, it depends on what you really want, right?
Yeah.
I think one is, okay, maybe 2, 3, and 4, but then you won't have all the alternatives.
So here's the, go ahead.
I guess, for me, both one is the appropriate one, because if you are evolving your schema during the implementation or during the sprint, it's more appropriate.
Yeah.
You get to know more advantages, disadvantages, what are the pros and cons, and then you are very close to the solution. Because before, if you are doing this in a sprint in advance or month in advance, then it is probably that you are ending up with some rework. To save that rework, it is better to start in the sprint duration only.
Yep.
For that, technical grooming can help.
For that what?
For that, technical grooming can help.
Technical grooming, before the sprint, or is it what you?
Within the sprint.
Within the sprint. What is technical grooming here?
Okay, so we are using this pattern like apart from functional grooming or the iteration grooming, we also have one session for technical grooming. So we are following a sprint of 2 weeks where we discuss with developers that whether the schema is aligned to our solution or not. If there is any change, we can do it immediately rather than defining it ahead of sprint.
Okay.
So that is helping us to save our rework.
I see. So you have a point within your sprint where you do some discovery of whether you need to change the design, I think is kind of how I'm interpreting that. When I hear grooming, I tend to think of the grooming in from Scrum before the sprint starts, so that's why I had to ask that question. Cool. Well, definitely number 4 has to be emergent. What could be more emergent? Sorry.
I think it will depend on what is it that you are really looking to build. It could be a combination of 2, 3, and 4 as well sometimes. And then we may need to have a view a month in advance. I wouldn't go for the first month because that's too far-fetched. But a month in advance could be possible when it's a big work which I'm doing. There could be dependent schemas which could be there. And we would want to have something in place which may not be the final version, which would evolve over the time as we do more of grooming, or even in the sprint, like we go over it, we understand it's an iterative process. So it is a combination for me, like 2, 3, 4.
What I think I hear. Sorry.
I think taking some context from the earlier discussion, they mentioned that, like, if you are locking down the schema sprint ahead, so it's just like locking down and maybe getting the waterfall to a less interval. So I think a true agile is something which is like agile in nature and which is like more discussion, and during sprint there are discussions that are bound to happen. So I think the reason as we are talking about emerging, so I believe there must be discussions that are going on in agile, not to lock down anything prior to, unless you get there, don't lock down.
Right.
So that's the reason I think it should be, over the discussion during the sprint, it should evolve. The schema should evolve.
Right. And so you're really saying, well, you're saying the other ones are fine, but number 3 is key.
Number 4 is more
number
emerging.
4, I'm sorry.
Number 4 is more emerging, and the question is more about the emerging. So
Yeah. I suppose we're sort of fixating on what does define mean, and does that mean I'm going to a sprint without any idea? And I don't believe any of you guys do that. I think everybody has an idea. It's just that people have different levels of comfort. So we're hearing people say, well, as database developers, culturally, they are used to having a lot of comfort and things not changing frequently many months in advance, maybe even a year in advance. And I'm challenging that culture. I'm saying, like, hey, you guys need to get agile there. And you should allow to change just like refactoring code. Do you plan to refactor your code a sprint in advance, or do you refactor your code during the sprint? Yeah, you guys refactor the code during the sprint. So if you see something wrong with the schema that needs to be changed, you should refactor that as well. And the database folks will frequently not like that answer. And they'll demand, a lot of times they'll demand from their teams to be much more upfront on design, maybe months in advance. And I think that's crazy. I'll just flat out say that. I think anywhere from 3 to 4 is where I'm comfortable with. But if you are demanding, it's all about lockdown and freezing. We use words, but we don't necessarily mean exactly the same thing as what's in other people's heads. But if you are demanding something more than 3, it's hard for me to imagine how you're going to respond to change even during your sprint at that point. Okay, so who said 4? Was this fellow here? Yeah. What size do you wear? Okay, cool. All right. Oops, better grab that. Hang on a second. So which of the following supports emergent design? Source control, migration scripts, TDD, or all of the above? Okay, so unfortunately it was a murmur. I don't know who's first. I saw you move your hand first, so I'm going to go. So all of the above. Yeah. And a lot of database work is frequently not done with source control. It's, they have one database copy somewhere. They use that as their source control, another database, and they try to preserve it that way. But the problem is it doesn't help you automate anything. Usually the work to get something from that database into other databases, and maybe have multiple versions out there, maybe you have more than one version, it becomes a lot of manual labor. Okay. Could you award that fellow a book, please? All right. Sorry, I got to respond to time here. We're going to jump to frontier. Oops, front end. All right, so front end development. Let's talk about that. Got to get through the full stack. A lot of people say that in the front end. They always tell me this. Lance, our code's too simple to bother unit testing. Why should we bother? Those Java guys, yeah, they need a unit test, by gosh. I think those database guys, yeah, they probably should, or they'll system test. But you know, we're cool. We'll just do a little manual testing, and we ship the code. And some of them don't even use source control there as well, or it's a little bit complex, let's put it that way. Okay, so what we're talking about is we're increasing the circle of what can be unit tested. And what does that mean? So this is where we say generally is front-end development. You can, of course, you can do front-end development and other things. You can do front-end development on even C with Tickle or TK or something like that. But most modern development, this is where we're looking at. So the question is, can that be unit tested? First question. You said false. OK, cool. Spelling of the text is correct. Can that be unit tested? Who said, give me an indication. OK, he says false. All right. And so far, that's correct. Form validation. Can you unit test that? Yes, I'm going to give this. So 1, 2, 3. OK. Colors aren't clashing. Nope. Who said nope over here? All right. It's getting complicated. You have to help remember this. We're going to have a big tie here pretty soon. The page contains all the widgets. Who said no? Did anybody say no yet? Okay. So he's saying no. Tell me more. Why?
I think widget is access, they are independent, and so at least my thought is like, so widgets are like, they are independent, they have their own specific nature, so they kind of, you know, the component picture is somewhere where I thought like might not be unit tested.
Well, the key is page. So that means we have to render the page. All right. So now we're outside the unit test area. So you're working with, what stack are you using here? MVC or something? Or how do you know it's getting rendered on the page? So the keyword is the page. So you have to decide if your contract with your MVC framework is solid. And if it is, then I think what you say could be true. Okay. You're saying it cannot. You're saying maybe it can be. I'm sort of thinking page. I want to see if the page has all the widgets. So I'm gonna just for the in essence of making it a yes/no question. I know it has some gray area. I'm gonna stick with the no. What do you want to say?
Again, the keyword is trying to map my answer. So again, if I want to display something on a page, so I, for example, in JavaScript, I throw a query, I get a response, and I know what are the widgets listed on that page. So for that query or for that piece of code, which throws the query and gets the response, I write unit test.
Correct. That's a good answer. However, you still don't know if it's on the page because you have to include that piece somehow in the page. However, you're injecting that in there, or writing it in there.
Yeah, I don't have an escape route from that page.
Correct.
Still, I'm holding to that. I'm matching to that, and my code is using that page as a responsibility.
Are you using direct DOM manipulation to load the page, or are you using HTML?
What are the widgets on this page?
Sorry, I'm not sure if I can understand exactly what you're saying right now before my time's up, so my apologies. So we want to know if the page contains all the widgets. And it could end up in the same circumstance where all your unit tests pass, but the page doesn't have it until you see that the page has it. Okay? So my recommendation is actually you system test that fellow. It's a smoke test, just to see if your widgets are there. You're not trying to do business logic testing. You're just trying to have a test. If you've created a new widget, you want to add a test to that. Okay, one more. Can activating widgets cause reaction? Can it be unit tested? Who said true? Somebody said true. Oh, okay. So tell me more.
We can separate out the logic of this is part of behavior.
Mm.
So we can separate out the unit test, removing the dependency of the
So you're thinking MVC at this point, and you're saying when I get a response in from the page, I can unit test that when that response comes in through my HTTP response object, that what it returns is the reaction, I suppose. All right, that's true. Yeah. Okay. So I have to back up here. Did I have anybody answer more than one question correct on that last set? I think you had two. Okay. Did you give him Agile Noir? Okay. All right. So I bet I'm down to very little time here. 10 minutes. Okay. All right. Let's talk about fast feedback for a moment. This is JavaScript. Who does JavaScript? Oh wow, quite a few. Good. All right. I don't know if you're familiar with Dust, but there's a Dust call in there. Okay. It's a rendering engine. So you give it some arguments, and it renders the HTML for you. Okay. True or false? Can you do test first on all of this code? Somebody said no. Who is that? Please raise your hand. Okay, I don't know who was first. Do you guys know? Okay. Tell me more.
More or less looking like trying to render something the data. So what can be tested is the data part, the fetching part. You're making a call to the service, fetching some data, and trying to render that as a part of this machine. So if we actually abstract that out, and then that can be tested. Rendering may not be.
So your answer is right. It can't be done with test first because this isn't very tested. That's sort of the quick answer. He's saying that there's a service call in here. And it's somewhere in that in this unnamed function. This unnamed function has actually a lot of problems too. We can't unit test an unnamed function. You can't directly test that. So when you do, my time is up. Wow, okay, that's the hard stuff. All right, cool. So do this fellow and add more. And does timeout mean I have 5 minutes or closing soon? Okay. Okay. All right. Shoot, I lost track. Anyways, thank you so much. Here's some takeaways on the clear for test inventory, system test what you can't unit test, and unit test your full stack. Now, I said there was some takeaway about, say, details on Spring. Come back here. Some details on Spring. You can hit this website. It'll have talk about unit testing in JavaScript, unit testing in Spring, unit testing in Java, database as well. Okay. You could just Google confessions of an Agile coach, and it'll pop up there. If you want to take a photo, go ahead. I'll stop here. Thank you.
Thank you, Lynn.
Thank you.